I follow back inside my enterprise, or is it, am I ready to deliver with this thing straight away? Or what goes into the maintenance of this project? Endless questions. Now, rather than speaking about a lot of things, I thought, okay, so if you were really there to make a web application, you would speak about something for the view in terms of jQuery, or you would want to do something with JSPs or your HTML5, for instance. Many MVVM frameworks in the form of Kendo UI or Knockout or Backbone for that matter. Now you talk about controllers, which are probably Spring MVC and injected services in the form of Spring services, talking to Hibernate DAOs and them being hosted on databases like MySQL, Postgres, Oracle. You probably have talked about a small Java stack which goes into really web application. Now the better answer is, if you're comfortable with all this, then it is proven to work with it. And Groovy and Grails has worked from the start with Jetty, with Tomcat, and in fact in Grails 2.1 too, Tomcat is a preferred embedded container. If you're talking about searches, Lucene, there is something called as Compass and searchable plugins which lets you run your search on Hibernate entities. You can still intermix your JPA. You're worried about continuous integration platforms. Jenkins is a superb fit for this. Things like that. So basically, if you're comfortable with all these logos and they attribute to you in some form, and even Neo4j property graphs, very new. Grails has a mature plugin for Neo4j. So if you have a Java solution out there, and then you're probably talking about, okay, am I really comfortable with having this library and Grails? And probably the answer is yes. So now we've discussed about everything there. Now, so there isn't anything that changes. The answer is yes, there is something which actually changes. The real thing that changes there are the development team skills and the development process. Now, this is a dynamic language. This is a new entrant. We said there's a flatter learning curve and never claimed on a no learning curve. So when you say the development team skills and the development process really changes, what really changes from within that? Now Groovy, you could be worried about, okay, how is Groovy as a language? How does my development chain really interact with it? What are the tools that are required for you to really compile, build, test, deploy, for instance? How does it really fit in with the external frameworks, and so on and so forth? So for a regular developer, just to get started, just like your framework to start, you have these questions to really start. So what do we really do? So where do we really start? Now, this is just a microscopic view on. Okay, these are probably all the changes or all the tools that you probably have worked on, and here's how it goes. Now we've already explained how this is being built on the Java 5 grammar and how it integrates with Java for that matter. Now it is a very shallow learning curve because it intermixes with Java. So time you think that you're getting stuck with Groovy, you can always move back into the Java way of coding things. And it will still work. The iterators and the closures on each or whatever, you can still move back to your regular iterators that are available in JDK. So that's just an example to really say, okay, you can still shift. So there is no, but the code will be less Groovy as they say it. So when you say developer productivity, the main thing that that has come up with the advent of all these languages is the need for an IDE which is as strong as Eclipse or IntelliJ for that matter, which gives you IntelliSense in terms of method definitions on classes and so on and so forth, which lets you guess through to your end, wherein you're making code and then you're delivering. You testing it faster, you're producing code faster, being more productive, delivering more features. If you were to really do it with regular text pad or something like that, it might take you longer to code, given the same person works on Eclipse or something like that. The good news is we have a lot of IDEs supporting Groovy and Grails. The main aspect is Spring Source Tool Suite is behind us, and Spring Source Tool Suite has released a recent version called Grails Spring Source Tool Suite, which is meant for just Grails development, and that's fantastic from them, and it's almost very close to the IntelliJ versions. IntelliJ really rocks with Groovy and Grails as a Groovy and Grails IDE, because the refactoring support that it offers, I don't think right now Eclipse can really match that right now. And TextMate, etc. are other popular names that support it as an IDE. Now, that's about, okay, we're convinced that we can code on that, we can have an IDE working on that, so we are more comfortable coming into it. Now, what about the other tools like Maven or something for the build like Ant? Now, how do I deploy it? How do I create them? The big news is the final deployment for Grails is war by default, and then it just generates on a command like Grails war, and then it creates a war for you with all your filters, your application session factories, etc., configured, and that's just with a command, and then it all goes out into one single war file. Now there are questions as to, okay, can we deploy it as an EAR? You can of course deploy it as an EAR, but right now the support is not there. But to write it and deploy it as an EAR, it's a simple job to really hook on to a Grails event. Like when you produce a war, or you want to create a script which will actually extend the Grails war, and then go ahead and do it. The other aspects that people really face are, you have spent considerable amount of time to really think about your process, to be more reactive to business. You've oriented them in an agile fashion, so you built your own continuous delivery pipeline, maybe on Jenkins, maybe on cruise control, on Go, or something like that, and you really want to know if this thing really fits into that. Now the big answer for all of these is Jenkins is an ideal fit. It comes with an HPI directly built for Grails. It needs a local installation. With Grails 2.1, there's something called as Grails wrapper, which will even solve things. And we've had considerable amount of success doing continuous delivery on with Jenkins for Groovy and Grails. These are the other servlet containers that might interest you in the form of what you've deployed before and how it has worked out. The other aspect is the other frameworks that you might really have known about, the Java frameworks that you can't live without, like Spring or JUnit for testing, for instance. If you're on JUnit, or I've used Selenium for all the time, then for my HTML units like web test or something like that. The point is, almost all of them have plugins available for Grails. So if you want a unit test, Grails default generates JUnit from 1.3.7. I think it's more Spock based on Grails 2.1. I'd have to look up that. They speak about Cucumber, Selenium. They all are available back inside Grails' plugins. So the guys who are aligned to something like BDD or TDD for that matter, it's inherent support from Grails that should really interest you. We have worked with mocking libraries like Mockito or EasyMock for that matter, and it will really interest you to know that Grails supports mocking out of the box, and it lets you mock your collaborators in a very efficient manner. So needless to say, on a very reactive agile platform, Grails really sparks off. That is the strength. Essentially, you build your test into code, and it promotes your way to really code with generating the test, and then with TDD, you design your controllers, your services, your domain going forward, and you put your tests in. It gives you phases for your tests. For instance, it's very test-centric. The coding becomes very test-centric, which is one of the real needs for having reliable delivery on your chain too. So if you're talking about something like, okay, I want to really have browser automation, and the ceremony that really goes into setting up, probably, it's zilch in Grails. There's, you just, as a matter of installing something like an EasyB plugin, and you choose a WebDriver in the form of Selenium. Right. Now, one of the other facts that we are faced with is I'm sitting in an enterprise, or okay, I have a lot of systems here with a lot of small libraries in, and these are very efficient for me. For instance, the previous enterprise that I was working in, they had something built out of TIBCO. For talking to TIBCO, they had some libraries like Java libraries written for this. The fact is, does it really fit? Does it really fit? Can you really reuse them? Now, Grails really works on the dry philosophy. When it is especially Java, you can take them as plugins, extend them as plugins, put them back inside your project as in-place plugins, or editing it in the scope of the project, or export them as libraries as you choose, and then incorporate helpers on top of it, and then get it back inside your groovier code. Now, this is a very small slide, so if I have to really speak about the plugins that Grails offers, there are numerous of them, almost 830 plugins for different causes. One of the main things that you can assemble applications faster, and these are Spring Security plugins. For instance, Shiro and Security are already there. JMS plugins, searchable plugins. You have GWT, GXE if you want to change your views to GWT, etc. The best part about it, that is a strong community behind that, a vibrant community behind Rails. So if I were to really look back at what we discussed so far, so we don't really have to change our environment. So if you've invested in a Java ecosystem, you probably stick with the same set of things. But what really changes is the way you deliver it, is the way you make these things. So essentially, if you're invested on a continuous integration platform, or if you've chosen to go open, it still offers you Rails as a first-class candidate, which will fit into any of these. So one of the reasons that worries people is, okay, open source, yes, what if I need help? There is a lot of commercial support available for several plugins, like Mark Palmer's plugin. The community is exciting, and the answers are never later than a day. So if you're working, for instance, there were quite a lot of resistance to move to really Goran way of working, because a lot of people here really thought that, okay, we're very comfortable with the JPA form of working, so we should stick to it. We can actually do things faster and better. We know this. Now the bitter answer is, you can still do it in JPA in Grails. So you don't really have to reinvent new methodologies to really work on. It's quite flat for learning, and it's whatever you apply in Java, you get back in Groovy. The most working part is the documentation, and I hope you agree with me when I say Spring is one of the better documented frameworks out there. Now we come back to a phase wherein you would really have to adopt Groovy and Grails in your enterprise. So how are you going ahead to do that? So what could be the starting points for adopting Groovy and Grails? What are the starting points for adopting Groovy and Grails? Now, you might be looking at building, you could be facing this scenario wherein you already have a Java application working out of Groovy and Grails, and then you want to build new modules for these applications. Now, it's a great candidate for things, as long as you believe in its power, and as long as you're convinced that your developers are up to it. Now, if they are really productive on Java, and probably if they have the same speed, you probably should not consider that. Now, when there is nothing, greenfield, when there's probably nothing, and then you want to really start out, and then you want to get an application out at no time. This is and you have a strong shop on Java. This is probably like the better frameworks you should really use. You get maturity on the JVM, and you get speed in Groovy and Grails. The other things that we tackled was, we already have these enterprise libraries, so how should we use them? Or should we chuck it all, rewrite it in Groovy? No, the answer is you probably wrap them out in Grails plugins and then use them back inside your projects. Right. The other candidates are like, I wouldn't say prototypes here, mostly because whatever I build in 1 minute, that's probably like a real application in itself. So if you want to really skim through the screen flows and then create that, you're probably better off coding and then creating the screen flows and then just letting the user have a feel of it, or having a beta released on it quickly.